I spent 3 days preparing dinner for my family before realizing they had all gone on vacation without me. I wish I could say that was the moment my heart broke, but the truth is, hearts don't break all at once when you get older. They crack slowly, quietly, one disappointment at a time, until one day you look around and realize you've become a stranger in your own family. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from, because sometimes I still need to remind myself there are kind people left in the world. The Saturday it happened started like most family weekends used to start in our house. I woke up before sunrise, tied my silver hair back with the same pale blue scarf I'd worn for years, and stood in my kitchen making pie crust from scratch while the coffee brewed beside me. Outside my window, the maple trees behind my house swayed gently in the October wind, scattering orange leaves across the backyard Ryan used to play in as a little boy. The weather forecast said it would reach 68 degrees by afternoon. Perfect weather for a family barbecue. At least that's what Nicole had told me earlier that week. Everyone's excited. Helen, she'd said over the phone in that sweet, polished voice she used around other people. Emma's been talking about your peach cobbler all week. I should have known better than to let myself feel excited. But loneliness does strange things to people. It makes hope grow in places wisdom should have closed long ago. By noon, my dining table was fully set. I used the good dishes my late husband had bought for our 25th anniversary, the white ones with the delicate gold trim. I folded cloth napkins beside each plate and placed little handwritten cards near the glasses so Emma would smile when she saw hers. I even bought fresh flowers from the farmer's market that morning. Sunflowers. Emma always said they made the house feel happy. Around 2 o'clock, I changed into a cream-colored sweater and touched up my lipstick in the hallway mirror. For a moment, staring at my reflection, I almost looked like the woman I used to be before silence became my primary companion. At 3, nobody had arrived yet. I told myself traffic around Sacramento had gotten worse lately. At 3:30, I texted Ryan. No response. At 4, I called him and it went straight to voicemail. Nicole's phone did the same thing. I stood there holding my cell phone while the kitchen clock ticked loud enough to make the whole house feel empty. The burgers were getting cold beside the potato salad. The candles I'd lit near the dining table had already burned halfway down. By 5 o'clock, something inside me started sinking. Not panic, not anger, recognition. That feeling was familiar, too familiar. I cleaned the kitchen slowly, wrapping untouched food in foil containers while daylight faded through the windows. The house grew darker around me, but I didn't turn the lights on yet. Somehow the dimness felt more honest. Then my phone buzzed. For one foolish second, I thought it was Ryan apologizing. Instead, it was Facebook. Nicole had posted new photos. I stared at the screen, so long my eyes began to blur. There they were. Ryan, Nicole, Emma, even my sister Diane and her husband, all standing beside a lake in Tahoe with matching smiles and wine glasses raised toward the camera. Behind them stretched a beautiful rental house with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. Everyone looked warm, relaxed, complete. The caption read, "Perfect family weekend with the people who matter most." I kept scrolling. One photo showed Emma roasting marshmallows beside Ryan. Another showed Nicole wrapped in a cream-colored scarf while my sister laughed beside her. In every single picture, there was an empty space where I should have been. That was the moment I finally understood something I'd spent years trying not to admit to myself. Families don't accidentally leave you behind over and over again. Eventually, it becomes a choice. I lowered myself into the dining room chair at the head of the table and looked around the silent room. 8 plates, 8 glasses, 8 untouched seats. The candles flickered weakly beside the flowers. Outside, the porch light turned on automatically as the sky darkened. I picked up Emma's name card and ran my thumb gently across the ink. Then I looked back, down at Nicole's smiling photos. Everyone looked so comfortable without me there. And for the first time in my life, I stopped wondering whether I was imagining it. They hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me. I did not sleep much that night. The house creaked the way old houses do when the temperature drops after sunset, and every sound seemed louder once you realize nobody is coming through the front door anymore. Around midnight, I walked back into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. The containers of untouched food sat stacked neatly on the shelves like evidence from a life that no longer existed. Potato salad, cornbread, peach cobbler, Enough food for 8 people who had chosen to spend the weekend pretending I did not exist. I closed the refrigerator slowly and stood there in the dark for a while listening to the hum of the motor. It is strange what loneliness does when you reach my age. It stops feeling dramatic. It becomes practical, like remembering to lock the doors before bed or taking your vitamins in the morning. Just another quiet routine. The next morning, I woke up with stiff knees and a dull ache behind my eyes. I made oatmeal, fed the birds outside my kitchen window, and tried not to look at my phone. By 10 o'clock, Ryan still had not called. Neither had Nicole, not even a text. I told myself maybe they felt guilty. Maybe they were waiting until they got home. But deep down, another part of me already knew the truth. People who feel guilty usually rush to explain themselves. Silence is different. Silence means comfort. It means they no longer worry about hurting you because they assume you will forgive them anyway. Around noon, I drove to the grocery store for things I did not really need. Sometimes older people shop simply to be around noise. I wandered slowly through the produce section, pushing my cart past pyramids of apples and stacked pumpkins while country music played softly overhead. Near the bakery aisle, I ran into Sandra Miller, a woman I had known since Ryan was in middle school. She smiled warmly when she saw me. "Helen, I saw the Tahoe pictures," she said. "That house looked beautiful." I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept smiling politely. "Yes," I said. "It looked lovely." Sandra adjusted her purse strap awkwardly. Nicole always puts together such perfect family trips. There it was again. Perfect family. I nodded like the words did not sting. People rarely mean to wound you. Most of the time, they are simply repeating the story they have been given. On the drive home, I kept thinking about all the little moments over the past few years that had never fully made sense to me. Birthday dinners moved to different restaurants without anyone telling me. Thanksgiving plans changing at the last minute. Family photos posted online hours after gatherings had already happened. At the time, Nicole always had explanations ready. "Oh no, Helen, I thought Ryan called you. You must have missed the group text. I did not want to bother you because I know you get tired." Small things, polite things, easy things to forgive. That was her talent. Nicole never excluded me loudly. She did it carefully, quietly, in ways that made me question my own memory before I questioned her intentions. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a package sitting near the front door. Inside was a framed school photo of Emma that had apparently been mailed days earlier. Tucked beneath the frame was a short handwritten note from Nicole. "Thought you would want the updated picture for your living room. Hope you are doing well." No mention of Tahoe. No apology. No acknowledgement that they had left me sitting alone beside a fully prepared dinner table while they laughed beside a lake 300 miles away. I carried the photo inside and placed it on the mantel beside older pictures from when Ryan was young. In one photograph, he could not have been more than 8 years old. He was grinning proudly beside a crooked birdhouse we built together one summer afternoon. Back then, he used to reach for my hand every time we crossed a parking lot. Back then, I never had to wonder whether my son loved me. I sat down in my armchair and stared at the old photographs until the afternoon light slowly faded from the room. Then a thought entered my mind so quietly it almost frightened me. Maybe Nicole had not changed my family. Maybe she had simply revealed who they were willing to become without me. The following Thursday, Emma called me unexpectedly just after dinner. Her voice sounded nervous in the way teenagers sound when they are trying to act casual about something uncomfortable. "Grandma, are you coming to my orchestra performance next week?" she asked. I looked up from the crossword puzzle sitting unfinished on my lap. "Of course I am," I said. "I would not miss it for the world." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then she lowered her voice slightly. "Okay, good." Before I could ask why she sounded uneasy, Nicole's voice appeared faintly in the background, asking who she was talking to. Emma answered too quickly, "Nobody." Then the call ended. I sat there for a while staring at the silent television across the room. Nobody. I told myself not to overthink it. Children learn survival skills from the homes they grow up in. Still, something about the conversation stayed with me all weekend. Tuesday evening arrived colder than expected. By 6 o'clock, the temperature had already dropped into the low 50s, and a thin layer of fog hovered over the high school parking lot when I arrived for the performance. I wore my dark wool coat and carried the small bouquet of white daisies I had bought for Emma after stopping at a flower stand on the way there. Inside the auditorium, Parents filled the rows speaking in low, cheerful voices, while students tuned instruments on stage beneath bright, overhead lights. I spotted Ryan near the center section almost immediately. He was laughing about something with another father while Nicole adjusted the sleeve of her expensive beige coat beside him. They looked polished, comfortable, like people inside a life I no longer belonged to. I started walking toward them carefully between the crowded rows when Nicole finally noticed me. For the briefest second, something flashed across her face. Surprise. Then it disappeared behind that smooth, practiced smile of hers. "Helen," she said brightly, loud enough for nearby parents to hear. "I did not realize you were coming tonight." The sentence landed softly, but not softly enough. I stopped, beside their row holding Emma's flowers against my chest. "Emma invited me," I replied. Nicole blinked once before quickly recovering herself. "Oh, right. Of course." Ryan stood up awkwardly and kissed my cheek. He smelled faintly like expensive cologne and winter air. "Good to see you, Mom. Good to see you." As if I were a distant relative visiting from another state instead of the woman who raised him. Nicole glanced toward the nearly full row beside them. "Actually, these seats are saved," she said gently. "But I think there are some open ones farther back." I looked down. Every seat in their row had coats or purses placed neatly across them like little barriers. Ryan did not move a single one. Neither did Nicole. Around us, people pretended not to notice. I nodded slowly. "That is all right." Then I walked toward the back of the auditorium alone. From my seat near the last row, I could still see Emma clearly beneath the stage lights with her violin resting carefully beneath her chin. She looked beautiful, older somehow. During intermission, groups of parents gathered in the aisles laughing and taking photos while students rushed toward family members. Emma spotted me immediately and hurried over with a smile that faded the moment she noticed where I was sitting. "Grandma, why are you back here?" she asked quietly. Before I could answer, Nicole appeared beside us carrying her perfect smile again. "Helen prefers quieter seats," she explained smoothly, resting a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Sometimes crowds overwhelm her." I felt something cold move through me then. Not anger, clarity. Nicole was not simply excluding me anymore. She was rewriting me, turning me into someone fragile, confused, difficult. The kind of older woman people slowly stop listening to because they assume she no longer understands what is happening around her. Emma frowned slightly at her mother. "Grandma does not get overwhelmed," she said. Nicole laughed softly like the comment was adorable. "Sweetheart, go get ready for the second half." Emma hesitated before walking away, glancing back at me twice. Nicole watched her leave before turning toward me again. Her smile remained perfectly polite, but her eyes did not. "You should have told us you were coming," she said quietly. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I glanced across the auditorium toward Ryan, who was pretending very hard not to watch the conversation happening between his wife and his mother. I did not realize I needed permission to see my granddaughter perform. Nicole's expression tightened for only a second. Then she smiled again. Nobody said that. But that was the thing about Nicole. She rarely said the cruel part out loud. She simply created situations where everyone else understood it without needing words. After the concert ended, I waited near the auditorium doors while parents crowded around their children with bouquets and cameras. The air smelled like perfume, winter coats, and the burnt coffee they sold near the lobby. I stood quietly holding Emma's flowers while people brushed past me in hurried little groups. Across the room, Nicole laughed beside another mother while Ryan helped carry Emma's violin case. They looked like one of those families printed inside holiday catalogs. Perfect lighting, perfect smiles, perfect distance from me. Then Emma suddenly broke away from them and ran toward me before either of her parents could stop her. "Grandma, these are beautiful," she said, taking the flowers carefully from my hands. Her cheeks were pink from the stage lights and excitement. For a moment, seeing her smile, something inside me softened again. Emma hugged me tightly in the middle of that crowded lobby while people walked around us pretending not to stare. "You played beautifully," I whispered. "Your grandfather would have been so proud of you." At the mention of my late husband, her expression changed gently. Emma still remembered him better than most people expected. She was only 8 when he passed away, but some people leave warmth behind them long after they are gone. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. Then her eyes shifted nervously toward her parents. Nicole was watching us now with that same composed expression she always wore when something irritated her publicly. Ryan stood beside her with his hands buried awkwardly in his coat pockets. Emma lowered her voice. "Grandma, did Mom really forget to save you a seat?" Children know more than adults think they do. I forced a small smile. These things happen, but Emma did not look convinced. Before she could ask another question, Nicole approached us smoothly. "Ready to go, sweetheart?" she asked brightly. Emma hesitated. "Can Grandma come get ice cream with us?" Nicole's smile froze for one tiny second. Most people would never have noticed it. I did. "Oh, honey, it is a school night," she replied gently. "And your grandmother is probably tired." Again, tired, confused, fragile. Nicole had been building that version of me piece by piece for years. Emma looked at me uncertainly. "Are you tired?" she asked. I could have said no. I could have insisted. But suddenly I felt exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. "Maybe another time," I said softly. Emma nodded slowly, though disappointment lingered across her face. She hugged me once more before leaving with her parents. I stood there in the lobby watching the three of them walk toward the parking lot together beneath the yellow glow of the streetlights outside. Nicole slipped her arm through Ryan's while Emma walked slightly ahead, scrolling through her phone. Nobody looked back. By the time I reached my car, the cold had settled deep into the evening air. Thin fog drifted low across the parking lot, wrapping around the rows of vehicles like smoke. I sat behind the steering wheel for several minutes before turning the engine on. My reflection in the windshield looked older than it had a month ago. Loneliness ages people quietly, not through wrinkles, through realization. On the drive home, memories kept surfacing one after another like puzzle pieces finally locking into place. Ryan canceling Sunday dinners because Nicole already made plans. Christmas mornings shortened because they needed to visit her family first. The year Emma's birthday party invitation arrived at my house 2 days after the event had already happened. Every single incident had come wrapped in apologies polite enough to make me feel guilty for being hurt. That was Nicole's gift. She never slammed doors. She simply closed them softly, enough that nobody else heard the sound. When I finally arrived home, the porch light illuminated the empty front steps and the potted mums I forgot to bring inside before the cold weather came. Inside, the silence greeted me immediately. No television, no voices, just the ticking grandfather clock near the hallway. I removed my coat slowly and placed my purse on the kitchen counter. Then I noticed something glowing on my cell phone screen. A new social media notification. Nicole had already posted pictures from the concert. There were photos of Emma on stage, photos of Ryan beside the orchestra banner, photos of smiling parents in the lobby afterward. I stared at each image carefully. In every single one, I was missing, not cropped out, not hidden in the background, completely absent, as if I had never been there at all. I lowered the phone onto the counter and stood alone in the kitchen while the refrigerator hummed softly behind me. Then I finally admitted something to myself that I had spent years avoiding. Nicole was not trying to include me poorly. She was trying to erase me carefully. 3 days after the concert, rain settled over Sacramento in that slow, steady way Northern California rain sometimes does in late October. The sky stayed gray all morning, and water slid quietly down my kitchen windows while I stood making tea. I had started noticing how silent my house truly was lately. Not peaceful silence, abandoned silence. The kind that forces you to hear every clock tick and floorboard creak. Around 11, my cell phone buzzed with a text from Emma asking if she could stop by after school to work on a history assignment. The message surprised me. Usually visits were arranged through Nicole first. I stared at the screen for a moment before replying yes. By 4 o'clock, Emma arrived wearing an oversized sweatshirt and carrying her backpack against the rain. Her cheeks were pink from the cold when she stepped inside. "It smells good in here," she said immediately. "Like cinnamon. Apple bread," I replied. "I made too much." She smiled faintly. "You always do." For the next hour, we sat at the dining room table while she worked on a presentation about American immigration history. Every so often she asked questions while I sliced apples beside her. The normalcy of it felt strange after months of careful distance. I realized how long it had been since someone simply sat in my kitchen without tension hanging in the air. At one point, Emma left the table to grab something from her backpack in the living room. Her cell phone remained beside her notebook, lighting up suddenly with incoming messages. I did not mean to look. I truly did not. But then I saw my own name appear across the screen. Managing Helen. That was the name of the group chat. My stomach tightened instantly. Before I could stop myself, my eyes moved downward across the messages filling the screen. Nicole, do not mention Thanksgiving yet. She will make it emotional. Ryan, maybe we can tell her we are keeping it small this year. Diane, honestly, it is easier without the guilt trips. Nicole again, just keep her busy that weekend. Another message appeared while I stared frozen at the phone. Did she say anything after the concert? Then a laughing emoji. My hands suddenly felt cold despite the warmth of the kitchen. I stepped back from the table slowly as if distance could somehow undo what I had already seen. Managing Helen. Not loving me. Not helping me. Managing me. Like I was a difficult problem they had to contain together. Like I was no longer a person with feelings, but a burden requiring coordination. Emma walked back into the room carrying a folder and immediately noticed my expression. Grandma, she asked quietly. I looked toward her phone still glowing faintly on the table between us. Emma followed my eyes. The color drained from her face almost instantly. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she rushed forward and grabbed the phone quickly. I am sorry, she whispered. Her voice sounded small. Ashamed. I should have comforted her immediately. Instead, I sat down slowly in the nearest chair because my knees suddenly felt weak. The rain tapped softly against the windows behind us while silence filled the kitchen. How long has that group existed? I finally asked. Emma stared down at the floor. I do not know exactly. Does everyone use it? Another pause. Then she nodded once. Something inside me cracked quietly then. Not because of Nicole, not even because of my sister, but because Ryan was there too. My son had watched people reduce me into an inconvenience for years and participated just enough to keep the peace around him comfortable. Emma looked close to tears now. Grandma, I never said anything in there. I reached across the table and covered her hand gently with mine. I know, and I did know. Emma still looked at me directly when she spoke. She still hugged me in public. She had not learned the family habit yet. The habit of making someone feel invisible while smiling politely at them. After she left that evening, I remained alone at the dining table long after dark. The kitchen light cast soft yellow shadows across the walls while rain continued falling outside. In front of me sat the empty teacup Emma forgot to rinse. I kept hearing those two words repeating quietly in my mind. Managing Helen. That was when I finally understood the truth. I was not imagining the distance. I was surviving inside a carefully constructed story about who they wanted me to be. The week after Emma accidentally showed me the group chat, I stopped answering every call immediately. That may sound like a small thing, but mothers like me spend decades training ourselves to respond before the second ring. We answer because someone might need us, because love becomes habit long before it becomes appreciation. But now, every time my phone buzzed with Nicole's carefully cheerful messages or Ryan's short check-ins, something inside me hesitated first. On Friday morning, Patricia Cole called unexpectedly. I had known Patricia for almost 30 years. Our husbands worked together before mine passed away, and although life had pulled us in different directions over time, she remained one of the few people who still spoke to me like I was fully present in the room. Would you like to have lunch? She asked. There is a small cafe near the river I think you would love. The cafe overlooked the Sacramento River with large windows facing the water. Rain from earlier that morning still clung to the sidewalks. Outside, making the streets shine silver beneath the cloudy afternoon sky. Patricia arrived wearing a camel-colored coat and pearl earrings, looking elegant in the effortless way some women do after 60. She hugged me tightly when she saw me. Helen, she said softly, pulling back to study my face. You look tired. I almost laughed at the irony of that word now. Tired. Everyone seemed to prefer me when I appeared weak enough to dismiss quietly. We ordered soup and tea, and for a while we talked about ordinary things. Weather, retirement, Patricia's new garden. But eventually the conversation slowed. Patricia stirred her tea carefully without looking up. I heard about Tahoe, she said at last. There was no cruelty in her voice, only sadness. I felt my chest tighten slightly. People seem to hear about everything except when I am actually invited. Patricia sighed softly. Helen, there is something I have struggled with for a long time. I looked at her across the small wooden table while rain tapped gently against the cafe windows beside us. Nicole talks about you. Patricia continued carefully. More than you probably realize. I stayed silent. Somewhere nearby, dishes clinked softly behind the counter. Patricia finally met my eyes. She tells people you are emotionally difficult, that you guilt Ryan constantly, that family events become exhausting whenever you are involved. Her words landed slowly, almost gently. Somehow that hurt more. And people believe her. I asked quietly. Patricia hesitated too long before answering. Some do. I stared down into my untouched tea while a strange calm settled over me. Not shock. Recognition. Suddenly years of polite distance from neighbors and old friends made sense. The shorter conversations. The careful smiles. The way invitations slowly stopped coming after Nicole entered our family. Patricia leaned forward slightly. I never believed everything she said. But Helen, she is very convincing. She says things in ways that sound concerned instead of cruel. Yes, that was exactly Nicole's talent. She never openly attacked people. She narrated them. Quietly. Skillfully. Like a woman adjusting lighting before a photograph. Patricia lowered her voice further. A few months ago at a charity dinner, Nicole told someone you were struggling mentally since your husband died. She said Ryan worries about leaving you alone too often. My fingers tightened around the warm ceramic cup. I see. I am sorry, Patricia whispered. I should have told you sooner. Outside the cafe window, I watched a young couple walk along the river beneath a shared umbrella while cold wind rippled across the water. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Patricia finally said the thing I think part of me already knew deep down. I do not think people even know the real you anymore. Something inside me went very still after that. Because she was right. Nicole had spent years building a version of me that was easier for people to avoid than understand. The lonely older woman. The sensitive mother. The emotionally draining widow nobody quite knew how to handle. And the most painful part was realizing how effective it had become. I had spent so much time trying to prove I was lovable that I never noticed someone else was controlling the story before I even entered the room. When lunch ended, Patricia hugged me again outside beneath the cold gray sky. Take care of yourself, Helen, she said quietly. As I drove home beside the river that afternoon, I kept replaying one sentence in my mind. I do not think people even know the real you anymore. Then another thought followed close behind it. Maybe I had spent so many years trying to stay included that I forgot to ask myself whether these people deserved access to me at all. The strange thing about stepping back from people is how quickly they notice once you stop chasing them. For years, I had been the one initiating everything. Calling first, sending birthday cards early, offering help before anyone asked for it. I was the glue holding together relationships that had quietly stopped holding me in return. But after lunch with Patricia, something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, more like a door closing softly somewhere deep inside my chest. The following Sunday, I did not call Ryan like I usually did. I did not text him a good luck. Before her math competition, I did not ask Nicole about Thanksgiving plans. I simply stayed quiet. Monday passed. Then Tuesday. By Wednesday evening, my cell phone finally rang. Ryan. I stared at his name on the screen for several seconds before answering. Hi, Mom, he said carefully. Everything okay? I almost smiled at the question. Apparently silence from me now counted as an emergency. I am fine, I replied. There was a pause. You have been quiet lately. Have I? Another pause followed. I could almost hear him searching for the safest version of the conversation. Nicole thought maybe you were upset about Tahoe. There it was. Not an apology. A management check-in. I walked slowly toward the kitchen window while holding the phone against my ear. Outside, late afternoon sunlight stretched across the backyard in long golden shadows. Ryan, I said calmly, did you know there is a group chat called Managing Helen? Silence. Real silence this time. Heavy enough that I could hear his breathing shift slightly. Emma showed you that, he finally asked quietly. Not denial. Not confusion. Confirmation. I closed my eyes briefly. Somehow honesty hurt worse. Yes. Mom, it is not what it sounds like. I looked out toward the empty bird feeder near the fence line. Then what does it sound like? He did not answer immediately. Somewhere in the background of the call, I could hear cabinet doors closing in his kitchen. Nicole was probably nearby listening. We were just trying to avoid conflict, he said at last. Conflict. Such a clean modern word for exclusion. I see, I replied softly. Mom, Nicole feels like sometimes family events become stressful. There it was again. Nicole's language. Polished. Therapeutic, carefully vague. I suddenly realized Ryan no longer sounded like himself when discussing me. He sounded like someone repeating approved statements from a meeting. "You do not need to explain," I said. "I understand now." Then I ended the call before he could continue. That night, instead of sitting alone in the living room replaying the conversation, I did something unusual. I searched online for beginner watercolor classes at the Community Arts Center, downtown. The next Thursday, I attended my first class. The room smelled faintly like paint, paper, and coffee. Most of the people there were retired women around my age. The one older man wore suspenders covered in tiny sailboats and spent the entire evening painting crooked lighthouses. Nobody asked complicated questions about my family. Nobody treated me like a burden requiring management. For 2 hours, we simply painted bowls of fruit while soft jazz played through small speakers near the windows. It felt oddly peaceful. The following week, I signed up for a gardening club, then a Saturday walking group near the river. Slowly, my calendar began filling with things that belonged only to me. Meanwhile, something else started happening too. Ryan began calling more often. At first, the conversations sounded casual, just checking in, seeing how you were doing. But beneath his voice, I noticed something unfamiliar. Unease. The dynamic had shifted without him realizing it yet. I was no longer standing outside the family door asking to be let in. I had quietly stepped away from the door entirely. One evening, Emma called while I was repotting herbs in my kitchen. "Dad keeps asking if you are mad at him," she admitted softly. I pressed fresh soil carefully around the base of a rosemary plant before answering. "And what do you think?" Emma hesitated. "I think he is nervous because you stopped trying." Her words lingered with me long after the call ended. Because she was right. Families like ours often depend on one person absorbing all the disappointment quietly. The moment that person stops chasing connection, everyone else suddenly feels the emptiness they helped create. That night, I sat on my back porch wrapped in a blanket while cold November air drifted through the trees. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked faintly in the distance. For the first time in years, I noticed something surprising. The loneliness was still there, but humiliation was beginning to disappear. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Emma called me late on a Sunday evening, sounding more anxious than I had ever heard her before. "Grandma," she whispered the moment I answered, "can I come over? Tomorrow after school? I need to show you something." Her voice immediately tightened something inside my chest. "Of course," I said gently. "Are you all right?" There was a long pause before she answered. "I do not know." The next afternoon arrived, unusually warm for November. The temperature reached nearly 70 degrees, and sunlight poured through my kitchen windows while I prepared sandwiches before Emma arrived. When she finally stepped through the front door, she looked pale and distracted. She dropped her backpack onto the floor without even taking her shoes off first. "What happened?" I asked quietly. Emma pulled her cell phone from her pocket and sat heavily at the dining table. "At school we are doing this ancestry project in biology," she explained. Everyone had to send in DNA samples to learn about family origins. My hand slowed against the cutting board. "All right." She swallowed hard. "Dad got his results back too because he thought it sounded fun." Something in her face made my stomach tighten instantly. Emma turned her phone toward me. On the screen was a message thread between Ryan and Nicole filled with confusion, screenshots, and frantic questions. Then I saw the sentence that changed the air inside the room completely. "Possible parent-child mismatch detected." I lowered the phone carefully onto the table. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Outside, wind moved softly through the trees behind the house while the kitchen clock ticked steadily against the wall. "Dad thinks Grandpa Whitmore might not actually be his biological father," Emma whispered. There it was, the secret I had carried alone for more than 30 years. Not because I was ashamed, because some truths destroy more people once released into the world. Emma stared at me closely. "Grandma, did you know?" I looked down at my hands resting quietly against the table. At 68 years old, you learn that silence has weight. Some silences protect people. Others slowly bury them alive. "Yes," I answered softly. Emma inhaled sharply. "Dad does not know what to do. Mom is furious." Of course Nicole was furious. I could already imagine her carefully controlled outrage. Not because she cared about Ryan's pain, but because uncertainty threatened the image she spent years building around their perfect family. "What exactly is Nicole saying?" I asked. Emma looked uncomfortable immediately. She said, "Maybe this explains why you have always been emotionally unstable." I almost smiled then. Even now, Nicole could not resist turning someone else's grief into another weapon against me. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I told her that was horrible. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand gently. Thank you. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Emma finally asked the question I knew was coming. Who was his real father? I turned slowly toward the kitchen window where afternoon sunlight stretched across the backyard grass in soft golden lines. A man named Thomas Reed, I said quietly. I knew him before your grandfather, and I separated for a short time many years ago. Emma stayed silent, waiting. Thomas was kind, I continued carefully. At a time in my life when kindness mattered more than people realized. I did not elaborate further. Some memories deserve privacy even after decades pass. Did Grandpa know? Emma asked. I nodded once. He knew Ryan was not biologically his before we reconciled. Her eyes widened, and he stayed. A faint smile touched my face for the first time that afternoon. Your grandfather loved Ryan from the moment he held him. Biology mattered less to him than loyalty. The room fell quiet again after that. Emma looked overwhelmed by the size of the truth now sitting between us. Then why did you never tell Dad? She asked softly. I looked down at the old wedding ring still resting on my finger after all these years. Because families survive on mercy more often than honesty, I said. And because your father deserved a peaceful childhood. Later that evening after Emma left, Ryan finally called me himself. His voice sounded strained and unfamiliar. Mom, he said quietly, is it true? I closed my eyes briefly before answering. Yes. Silence filled the line. Then came the question that revealed everything breaking apart inside him. Why did nobody tell me? I stood alone in my dark kitchen holding the phone, while cold evening shadows settled across the house around me. Because the only people protecting this family all these years were your father and me, I replied softly. And one of us is gone now. Thanksgiving arrived cold and clear that year. Frost covered the edges of my front lawn early that morning, and pale sunlight stretched quietly across the neighborhood while I stood alone in my kitchen making coffee. For the first time in decades, I had not prepared a massive family dinner. No turkey thawing in the sink. No extra folding chairs waiting near the dining room wall. No carefully handwritten place cards beside polished dishes. The silence inside the house felt unfamiliar at first, then strangely peaceful. Around 10 o'clock, Ryan called. His voice sounded exhausted, as though he had not slept properly in days. Mom, he said quietly, can we come by later? I leaned against the kitchen counter and stared out the window toward the maple trees swaying softly in the cold wind. Who is we? I asked calmly. There was a pause long enough to answer the question without words. Emma and me, he admitted. Nicole was not included. I closed my eyes briefly. Somewhere deep inside me, I felt sadness for all the years it had taken to reach this point. All right, I said softly. They arrived just after noon. Ryan looked older somehow. Not physically, spiritually. Like someone who had finally realized the ground beneath his life was less stable than he believed. Emma hugged me tightly the moment she stepped inside. Ryan lingered near the doorway awkwardly, his hands buried in his coat pockets the same way they always were when he felt ashamed. I invited them into the living room where a fire burned softly in the fireplace. For several minutes, nobody spoke much. Emma eventually wandered toward the kitchen to help herself to pie, leaving Ryan and me alone beside the fire. He stared down at his hands for a long time before finally speaking. Nicole moved into her sister's house for now, he said quietly. I nodded once, not surprised. She said you manipulated me my whole life. The fire crackled softly between us. And what do you think? I asked. Ryan rubbed his face. Tiredly. I think I spent years letting someone convince me that love from you was pressure instead of care. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I stayed silent. Because some realizations need room to breathe once they finally arrive. He looked around the living room slowly then. The old bookshelves. Family photographs. The quilt folded neatly across the armchair where his father used to sit every evening reading newspapers. Dad knew all those years, he asked softly. Yes. Ryan swallowed hard. And he still treated me like his son. I looked toward the framed photograph resting above the fireplace mantel. My late husband smiling beside a fishing boat many summers ago. He was your father, I said quietly. In every way that mattered. Tears filled Ryan's eyes then, though he tried hard to hide them. At 42 years old, my son suddenly looked painfully young again. like the little boy who used to wait by the front window every evening for his father to come home from work. "I do not know how to fix any of this," he admitted. I studied him carefully for a moment before answering. "Some things are not fixed all at once." Then I added the part he probably needed to hear most. "But truth has a way of clearing rooms people were never meant to stay inside forever." Ryan lowered his head quietly after that. No excuses, no defensiveness, just grief. Emma eventually returned carrying 3 slices of pie on mismatched plates. We ate together beside the fireplace while afternoon sunlight slowly faded across the living room carpet. Nobody forced cheerful conversation. Nobody pretended everything was normal. And somehow, because of that, the moment felt more honest than most holidays I had survived in years. Before leaving that evening, Emma hugged me again near the front door. "I am glad you are my grandmother," she whispered. I kissed the top of her head gently. "I am glad you still know who I am." Ryan lingered outside on the porch after Emma walked toward the car. Cold air drifted through the open doorway, while fallen leaves scraped softly across the driveway. "Mom," he said quietly, "I am sorry." I looked at him standing there beneath the porch light, with regret written across his exhausted face. For years, I imagined this apology would heal something inside me. But strangely, it did not, because healing had already started before he ever said the words. "I know," I replied softly. Then I touched his arm gently before stepping back inside the house. Through the window, I watched him walk slowly toward his car, where Emma waited quietly in the passenger seat. The porch light cast long shadows across the driveway as they pulled away into the cold November night. I stood there for a moment alone beside the window, listening to the silence settle softly around me again. Except this time, the silence no longer felt like rejection. It felt like peace. They spent years treating me like the black sheep of the family. But in the end, I was the only one who never lied.